"Get out! You're not welcome here." Her voice shook the walls, but the bitter truth was this: the house she was screaming in wasn't hers at all. It was mine. For decades I worked sunup to sundown, raising my only son after losing my wife too soon. Every nail, every beam in this house was carved from my sacrifice. And yet, the woman he chose to marry looked me in the eye and tried to erase me from my own home. Family is supposed to be where love begins, not where betrayal takes root. But sometimes the ones you open your heart to are the very ones who push you out. Have you ever faced something like this in your own life? Take a deep breath. You're doing fine. Now let's walk through this story together. James never asked to become a single father. One morning, in his early 30s, he kissed his wife goodbye before work and never saw her alive again. A sudden heart attack stole her life, leaving James with a toddler clinging to his leg and a world that felt unbearably empty. The neighbors brought casseroles, the church offered prayers, but none of it filled the void at the dinner table or quieted the cries at night. From that day on, it was just James and Daniel against the world. Paradox shaped his existence. He was poor in money, but rich in determination. He couldn't give Daniel shiny toys or vacations, but he gave him something far more lasting: time, patience, and a home built on love. By day, James labored at a carpentry shop, his hands calloused from sanding planks and hammering nails. By night, he returned to a tiny rented apartment, reading bedtime stories under the dim glow of a thrift store lamp. It was in those long years of exhaustion and hope that a dream formed. James wanted something permanent for his son, a place where Daniel would never have to feel rootless again. So he began to save. Not much, just coins in a jar at first, later dollar bills tucked into an envelope. Every spare moment he could steal from work, he spent sketching designs and scavenging materials. Slowly, the dream took shape. A modest house on the edge of town, built board by board with his own hands. The house itself became a paradox, too. To outsiders, it was nothing but a plain wooden structure with peeling paint and squeaky floorboards. To James, it was a fortress, a sanctuary, a love letter in wood and nails. Each plank carried a memory: the porch where Daniel learned to ride his tricycle, the kitchen where they baked lopsided birthday cakes, the backyard where fireflies danced in summer evenings. As Daniel grew, James's sacrifices bore fruit. The boy excelled in school, his sharp mind and kind heart setting him apart. Teachers praised him, scholarships followed, and eventually he walked across a stage in a black gown, diploma in hand. James wept openly that day, unashamed. Every blister, every sleepless night, every penny scraped together had been worth it. When Daniel introduced Clara, his fiancée, James welcomed her with cautious optimism. She was polished, confident, and ambitious, the kind of woman who seemed destined for city lights rather than small-town porches. Yet James believed she could bring balance to Daniel's life. Perhaps together, they could turn the old house into a home filled with even more laughter. The wedding was intimate, held beneath the oak tree James had planted the year Daniel was born. Strings of lights twinkled in the branches. Friends and neighbors gathered with smiles, and James gave a quiet toast, his voice thick with pride. He thought he was witnessing not just a marriage, but the continuation of a dream. A family growing, roots sinking deeper into the soil he had tended with love. Afterward, Daniel and Clara moved into the house. To James, it made perfect sense. Why waste money on rent when the home had plenty of space? He imagined dinners around the table, late-night conversations on the porch, maybe even grandchildren running barefoot across the hardwood floors. The house was big enough for generations, exactly as he had always envisioned. At first, everything seemed fine. Clara smiled politely, thanked James for meals, and complimented his craftsmanship. But as days turned into weeks, James noticed subtle shifts. Furniture rearranged without asking, heirlooms pushed into boxes, comments about the house being too old. He brushed it off, telling himself it was normal adjustment. After all, he had weathered storms far greater than a few careless words. Still, late at night, as he lay in his bed listening to footsteps in the hallway, James couldn't ignore the unease curling in his chest. The house he had built to be a haven now felt fragile, as though cracks were spreading in the foundation. not of the wood, but of the family within it. The storm was coming. He just didn't know how close it already was. At first, James convinced himself Clara simply needed time. After all, moving into a new marriage, a new rhythm of life, and sharing space with an older man couldn't have been easy. He told himself her sharp sighs and impatient looks were just nerves, not contempt. But as weeks turned into months, those small barbs sharpened into blades. She began correcting him in front of Daniel. When he offered advice about fixing the gutter, she cut him off with, "We'll hire someone. We don't need old-fashioned fixes." When he cooked dinner, she picked at the food, saying it was too rustic. Even in the smallest things, the way he folded laundry, the way he hummed while working, Clara found reasons to roll her eyes. The paradox burned at James's core. This was the very home he had built to protect his family, yet inside its walls he was treated like an intruder. He didn't want to believe Clara could be cruel, but her disdain grew too sharp to ignore. Daniel tried to play peacemaker, caught in a tug-of-war he didn't fully understand. "Dad, don't take it personally," he whispered late one night when Clara had gone to bed. "She's just independent. She wants privacy. Maybe if you gave her space, things would calm down." James nodded, his chest aching. Privacy was one thing, exile was another. One Saturday, the tension snapped. James was crouched in the kitchen, tightening the hinge on a cabinet door that had been squeaking for weeks. He had his screwdriver in hand when Clara stormed in, her heels striking the tile like drumbeats. "Do you have to meddle with everything?" she snapped, arms crossed. "This isn't your workshop. It's our home now." James looked up, startled. "I was just making sure it didn't fall." Her eyes flashed with scorn. "There's always an excuse. You hover, you interfere, you make Daniel feel like a child in his own house. We deserve to live like adults, not with you watching our every move." Her words hit harder than any hammer blow. James froze, then slowly set the screwdriver down. He wanted to argue, to remind her that every nail in this place was his, that the cabinets she mocked were built by his hands to shelter his son. But Daniel walked in at that very moment and James swallowed the words. He had always promised himself he would protect his son from pain, even if it meant swallowing his own. That night, the storm inside the house erupted. Clara stood in the living room, her voice rising with each sentence until it cracked through the air like thunder. "Get out! You're not welcome here!" The words echoed against the walls James had built, searing into his memory. Daniel froze by the doorway, his tie still loosened from work, his face pale with shock. James stood motionless, every muscle stiff, his heart pounding. He could have shouted back, could have revealed the truth that the deed still bore his name. But pride clashed with love, and love for his son won. "I'll give you space," he murmured instead, voice low, heavy with dignity. He gathered a few belongings in silence and stepped into the night, leaving behind the home that had once been his pride. That evening, James moved into the shed at the back of the property, the same place where he had once carved furniture to pay for Daniel's college. To the neighbors, it was unthinkable. The man who built the house now exiled to its shadow. Whispers spread like wildfire. How could a son allow this? That poor man. But James kept his head down. For Daniel's sake, he would endure even this. Still, as he lay on a creaky cot in the shed, staring up at the rafters, James knew Clara's anger wasn't about space. She didn't just want him gone. She wanted something much bigger. If you understand his pain, just comment, why? Life in the shed was a daily reminder of how far James had been pushed. The structure had once been his workshop, a place that smelled of pine wood and varnish, filled with tools neatly hung on the walls. Now it was his reluctant home. The cot sagged in the middle. The single bulb overhead flickered when the wind rattled the wires, and the thin walls let in every chill of the night. When it rained, water dripped from the roof, leaving dark stains on the floor. Still, James endured, telling himself he had faced worse storms. Every evening he watched the house from the small window. The lights glowed warmly, yet it felt colder than the shed. Through the kitchen window he sometimes saw Daniel, shoulders slumped, moving like a man weighed down by invisible chains. Clara often paced behind him, her voice sharp, gestures quick. James couldn't hear the words, but he knew their tone: demanding, restless, dissatisfied. Her disregard grew bolder now that James was out of sight. She sold or discarded pieces of furniture he had built decades ago. A rocking chair from the days when Daniel was a baby, the carved shelves that had held family photos. In their place appeared glossy modern furniture, cold and impersonal. To Clara, history meant nothing. Style was everything. Neighbors noticed the change and whispered, some shaking their heads. "She's erasing him piece by piece," one woman muttered, after watching Clara haul out the old rocking chair. One late afternoon, as James returned from a small repair job in town, he heard Clara on the phone at the back porch. She thought no one was listening. Her words sliced through the air. "Yes, I told you, soon. The house will be on the market. Daniel just needs to sign. Once it's sold, we'll finally have enough to move into the city where we belong. I'm not living in this dump forever." James froze in the shadow of the oak tree. The truth hit him like a blow to the chest. Clara's hostility hadn't been about privacy or space. It was about control. She wanted not only to drive him out but to strip away the legacy he had built for his son. Later that night, he tried to raise the subject gently with Daniel. His son avoided his gaze, fumbling with his hands. "Dad, don't worry. Clara just thinks we need a fresh start. Nothing's decided yet." But the tremor in Daniel's voice told James otherwise. His son was torn, pulled between loyalty to the woman he had married and the man who had raised him. Alone in the shed, James paced the wooden floor. In the corner sat a leather folder, inside it the original deed that still bore his name. He had guarded it for years, a silent safeguard against life's uncertainties. Now its weight felt heavier than ever. If he revealed it, the truth could stop Clara's scheme, but it could also shatter whatever fragile peace remained between him and Daniel. The paradox gnawed at him. To protect his home, he might have to risk losing his son. To protect his son, he might have to lose his home. He had spent a lifetime sacrificing for Daniel. Was it time to sacrifice again, or to finally stand his ground? Meanwhile, whispers in the neighborhood grew louder. People pitied James, some offering meals, others urging him to fight back. But James only nodded, keeping his turmoil hidden. They couldn't understand the cost of the choice before him. Each night, as the wind rattled the thin shed walls, James lay awake staring at the beams above him. The house he had built was slipping away, dismantled not by time or weather, but by someone who claimed to be family. And though he tried to cling to patience, he knew a breaking point was inevitable. The storm he had dreaded was no longer on the horizon. It was already inside his walls. The breaking point came on a Sunday evening, when the air inside the house felt heavy and charged, as if even the walls knew a storm was brewing. Clara called for a family meeting. Her voice carried through the rooms, clipped and commanding, leaving no room for refusal. Daniel shifted uneasily while James entered from the shed, his clothes smelling faintly of sawdust, his face worn but calm. On the coffee table, Clara had arranged a neat stack of papers, their edges perfectly aligned. Beside them lay a sleek silver pen, gleaming under the lamp. She stood tall, hands on her hips, her tone coldly triumphant. "This," she announced, tapping the papers, "is our future. If we sell this house, we'll finally have enough money to buy a condo downtown. Daniel, you'll be closer to work. I can finally live the life I deserve. All you need to do is sign." Her words rang out with confidence, but Daniel's face faltered. He glanced at his father, then back at the contract. "Clara, I'm not sure this is the right move. This house—" Clara cut him off sharply. "This place is a burden, Daniel. It's just an old wooden box. You think staying here honors your father? No, it traps us in the past. We need to move forward." James felt every word like a nail driven into his heart. To her, this was just wood and nails. To him, it was a lifetime of sacrifice, every memory etched into its beams and floorboards. He had built this house to protect his son, and now it was being reduced to nothing more than property on a market sheet. Slowly, James leaned forward. His movements were deliberate, steady, though his hand trembled slightly as he pulled out a worn leather folder he had carried from the shed. Without a word, he laid it on the table, the aged leather cracking softly under his fingers. Then he opened it and spread out a yellow document across Clara's pristine contract. Silence gripped the room. Daniel's eyes widened as he scanned the page. His father's name, bold and clear, sat at the top of the property deed. Not transferred, not shared, owned outright. "Dad," Daniel whispered, his voice thick. "This house, it's still yours?" James nodded. His voice was steady, though heavy with decades of restraint. "I built it. I paid for every board, every shingle. I never signed it away. I kept it in my name because I wanted to be sure you'd always have a place to come home to. One day, it was meant to be yours. Not a bargaining chip." Clara's face went pale, then flushed red with fury. "This is ridiculous. That paper doesn't matter anymore. We live here. We make the decisions. Daniel, don't let him manipulate you with guilt." But Daniel's hands trembled as he held the deed. For the first time, he saw his father not as a shadow in the background, but as the man who had given him everything. The silence James had endured, the humility with which he had borne every insult. It wasn't weakness, it was dignity. Clara slammed her fist on the table. "If you don't sign, you'll regret it. Do you really want to throw away your marriage for this man?" Her words hung in the air like poison. Daniel sat torn, his chest rising and falling, as though the weight of two worlds pressed down on him. On one side, a wife demanding ambition at any cost. On the other, a father who had given his very life so his son could thrive. James didn't move. He didn't beg, didn't argue. He simply sat with quiet strength, the truth laid bare before them all. The choice no longer rested with him. It was Daniel's to make, and it would change everything. The silence after Clara's outburst seemed to stretch forever. The clock ticked on the mantel, each second hammering at Daniel's conscience. He looked down at the deed in his hands, the paper trembling slightly, as if it carried the weight of all his father's sacrifices. His chest tightened with the memory of his childhood. Bedtime stories by the fireplace, pancakes on Saturday mornings, the smell of sawdust when his father returned from the carpentry shop. Every part of his life was tied to these walls. Finally, Daniel set the pen down with a quiet clink that echoed louder than any shout. His voice, low at first, grew firm. "I can't do this, Clara. I won't sign. This house isn't just a building. It's my father's life. It's our history. Selling it would erase everything he worked for." Clara's eyes blazed with fury. "So that's it? You're choosing him over me? After everything I've given up for this marriage?" Daniel stood, shoulders squared. "If you can't respect my father, then you can't respect me. Marriage isn't about tearing down what came before, it's about building together. But all you've done is try to erase." Clara's composure cracked. Her hands shook as she snatched her purse from the sofa. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Both of you. Don't come begging when you're stuck in this miserable little life." She stormed toward the door, heels striking the hardwood in angry rhythm. The slam of the door reverberated through the house, leaving behind an uneasy stillness. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. Daniel stood frozen, his breaths shallow. Slowly he turned to face his father. His eyes glistened with guilt. "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have defended you sooner. I let her make me believe you were in the way. When the truth is, you've always been the reason I could stand tall." James rose from his chair, his expression calm, almost tender. "Son," he said softly, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder, "I didn't spend my life building this house for thanks. I built it so you'd always have somewhere safe, somewhere to come back to. You don't owe me anything, except to live with honesty and love." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes as he pulled his father into a tight embrace. In that moment, the bitterness of months melted away, replaced by the bond that had carried them through every hardship. In the weeks that followed, Clara packed her belongings and left town. Rumors swirled among neighbors, but James paid them no mind. He had weathered storms before, and this one had passed too. Together, father and son began to rebuild. They repainted walls that had grown dull, repaired broken shelves, and replanted the garden Clara had neglected. Each hammer swing and brush stroke became a silent vow. This house would remain theirs, a fortress of resilience and love. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light across the porch, Daniel turned to his father with a quiet smile. "You know, Dad, one day this place will be full again. Maybe children running down the halls, dinner simmering in the kitchen, laughter spilling out of every corner, not because of who owns it, but because of what it means." James leaned back in his chair, eyes soft, voice steady. "That's all I ever wanted, son. Not just a house, a home." And for the first time in a long while, peace truly returned to the place James had built with his hands and protected with his heart. In the end, this story was never about property lines or signatures on paper. It was about sacrifice, love, and the quiet strength of a father who refused to let bitterness define him. Clara saw only a house to sell, but James and Daniel discovered something far more powerful. A home that could withstand betrayal because it was built on loyalty and trust. Life has a way of testing us, often through the people closest to us. But when the dust settles, the bonds formed by sacrifice and love always prove stronger than greed or ambition. Maybe you've faced moments where family felt like strangers, or where love demanded courage. This story reminds us that even in the darkest conflicts, truth and loyalty can light the way home. If you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, make sure to subscribe for more.